Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders. Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Sara Beykpour. Sara received her bachelor's in software engineering and cognitive science at the University of Waterloo. While she spent the better part of her career working at Twitter, she also experienced working at an early stage startup for a brief period too. Shortly after, she discovered Periscope, a live video streaming application. Periscope actually brought her back to Twitter after it was acquired in 2015, bringing her to a roundup of about 11 years collectively working at Twitter, where she led engineering teams as well as product management teams on products including Vine, Creation and Conversation, Twitter Blue, and the advertiser experience. Now, as of February of this year, she chose to take the leap to found her own company. While it is in stealth mode, we may get a very sneak peek of what she's working on. First, Sara, it is so great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Carly.
Of course. So first, set the scene. Where are you in the world? What's your work situation like? Yeah, what's going on?
So I'm currently at my office, and we have a small office in Marin that my co-founder and I commute to every day, and I'm joining you from here.
Amazing.
We have it's nice and quiet, and right next to some awesome restaurants and the ferry, so it's a really great place to be.
Yeah. So Sara, what I love to do, and I know you know this, but I want to go back to 5-year-old Sara, 10-year-old Sara. What was your childhood like? What was exciting to you? And what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I mean, so if for folks that know me, they're probably unsurprised that I was a very outgoing and maybe some would say bossy child. I was just always wanting to do the next thing, always, saying that I was bored. I wanted more stuff to do. I'm sure I was a handful for my parents. I now have a 1-year-old toddler who probably exhibits some of those traits. So it's all coming back to me. But, I really wanted to do stuff that was engaging. And at a very young age, my parents got a computer that I just played with, played DOS video games, figured out how to do those commands. One memory that sticks with me a lot is I played like a text-based golf game in DOS where it just said, okay, it's it's hole number 3, 400 yards, par 4. What club do you want? And then you type in, I want an iron and whatever. And it was like, it would just give you the result in text. And that was just the beginning of like my foray into computers. And I just loved understanding how they worked, how they responded to commands, all that kind of stuff.
And Sara, was this a self-taught almost experience, or were maybe your parents, your siblings, was someone teaching you like, look, computers are cool, this is fun, you could do this, or was it more just, you know what, I'm gonna sit in my room and explore the power of a computer myself?
So definitely at first my parents helped set me up, but then my older sister and I, we kind of took off from there. I was born in a small country in West Africa called Côte d'Ivoire, which folks in the US may know better as Ivory Coast.
Yeah.
Kind of moved around all over West Africa, eventually moved to Canada. And during that time, my sister and I would spend we had a lot of time together where we would kind of fiddle around with computers, video games, all that kind of thing. And there was definitely a point in which, what we were doing surpassed what my parents were kind of capable of teaching us. And then when we got the internet, I was living in Toronto at the time. When we got the internet, my sister and I used internet resources to teach ourselves HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that was our first foray into programming, self-taught with each other. And we would just build websites for each other for no reason whatsoever. about the things that we loved. So we loved video games, we loved the Backstreet Boys, we liked Star Trek, and we would just build fun websites for each other that were just silly. And we were part of an internet community, I felt like, in those
Yeah.
early web days, of other folks that were kind of teaching each other how to do that stuff. And that's how it all began.
And was that in high school around where you started to actually code and build websites, or more
That
even
was when
younger?
I was like 8 or 9.
Oh my,
And
okay.
my
So I was way
sister,
off.
who is 3 years older than me, who is 3 years older than me, she and I, figured it out,
Wow.
just using what was
Okay.
available to us. So we were tinkering around for a long time. I didn't start formal programming until I got to high school. Um, and even though I wasn't like familiar with some of the language that was used to describe how to do things, I picked all of that up very quickly. And then I was just like off to the races.
So, okay, around, 17, maybe 16, 17, college is now in the picture. You decide to attend University of Waterloo, which is a very prestigious engineering focused school. Was that a very easy decision given that, since 8 years old, you've been building websites? Or did you always know software engineering is the route I want to take? I could see myself doing this for many years to come.
So I definitely knew I wanted to do software engineering or computer science. And my older sister at that point had already gone to Waterloo and she was studying computer science. But I was a bit more of a wild teenager and wanted to go to more of a party school, or I don't know, do something that wasn't so academic focused.
Yeah.
Um, and my mom, bless her, knew that Waterloo was going to be the best thing for her daughters, and bribed me. She said that if I went to Waterloo, I could take the car, and I took it. I was 17. I was a year. I skipped a grade, and so I was a year younger, and all of that. It didn't end
Yeah.
up mattering because Waterloo is a 5-year program, so I kind of caught up to my peers by the end of all of that. But I was 17, and the car was a very exciting prospect to have with me, and so that's what I did. And then my younger sister also went to Waterloo for software engineering. So all three of us. My,
Yeah.
my mom got it right.
It seems so. And
Yeah.
so, given where you are today, right? You're a founder now. You have the founder hat on, and probably leading up to this, you did software engineering, then you pivoted to product management, which we'll get into. But I'm super curious, in those moments, even, high school and then especially college, were there pieces or experiences that you had that kind of alluded to, being a founder and where you are today?
So I would say like no, because when I was at Waterloo, there are probably dozens of entrepreneurship clubs and support systems at that university now, and as there are at many universities. But at the time, I think there was one, and it was started by two people in my class, and so there wasn't a lot of encouragement of entrepreneurship. And so even if I did think, oh, maybe I should start a company, I wouldn't have even known where to get started. Whereas I feel like the folks that I meet that have gone to Stanford and other universities where entrepreneurship is encouraged and there's precedent and there's like so and so started this company while they were still at school and all of that was all around. I looked at that with envy. But Waterloo was very much focused on engineering excellence
Mhm.
at that time and less on entrepreneurship. So that wasn't really what I was um, being inspired to do. And so when I did have a few classmates that were like, oh, after we graduate, I'm going to start my own company, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But wasn't kind of in my mind as like something that I
Right.
needed to do.
Almost like a first hint of it,
A first hint.
potentially.
Yeah.
Okay. And so after Waterloo, after university, you continue down the software engineering track. Walk me a little bit through that first decision of, okay, in the workplace, what were you optimizing for? How were you thinking of like, what, this is a great place for me to now start my career?
So from when I was, a kid, programming was very engaging for me, very therapeutic, very engaging. I I get a similar amount of satisfaction from programming that I do from playing video games, that I might from listening to music or playing music. This idea that you can like kind of wave your arms around and things happen as you tell them to, was very appealing for me. And if for folks that do program and get into that zone, getting into that zone where you're just coding was it's kind of addictive. And so
Yeah.
being able to do that at work and get paid for it and all of that was just a no-brainer for me. So that's kind of how I that's where I wanted to go. So when people talked about entrepreneurship and all of that, and I was like, okay, but then you're just like talking to people all day and you're not like coding, building. So at that time, that wasn't as appealing to me.
So, Sara, I'm really curious to know, and so for instance, what I really believe in is the power of exposure, right? And I'll tell you a little bit more, but for instance, you were exposed to software engineering, computers, coding at a really early age. And we've seen there are numbers to prove it that there is a significant gap between men and women who who code and who have that confidence to code. And so I want to almost hear your perspective of how has that experience been for you, whether it's at an early age in high school versus, at the University of Waterloo, to then in a professional sense of being, a woman engineer and an engineer in the room. How has that been? Have you ever had to really, self-advocate for yourself or think, what, I need to find the confidence in myself because I probably won't get it from others because people perceive and have these perceptions of myself?
Yeah, I think I feel like I've been very lucky, in that my sisters and I did a lot of that early discovery of programming together. And then when I went into high school, I was at an all-girl high school. So, were there a ton of programmers in my class? No, but they were all women because it was an all-girl high school. And I think only a handful of us went into computer science fields. And one of my very close friends in high school, who I sat next to in my programming class or whatever, I could just tell she was made for this. She picked up things really quickly. She would find bugs in my code, and she ended up going into a medical field. And I remember thinking, like, that's just such a bummer because, I really think that she would have been a very talented programmer. But it wasn't until I got to college that I was like, oh yes, this is what people talk about when they're like, there are few women in engineering. And I knew that like objectively, but I didn't really feel it until I got into college. But I was very lucky to have a great support system in college, and folks that were supportive. And I had a wonderful experience at Waterloo, made great friends, worked with talented people, and many of whom I'm still in touch with, and I'm connected to in the industry, which is wonderful. And then I think I've also been very lucky that because of the confidence that I have, that I think was just instilled in me at a young age, I've never really felt like I was ever at a disadvantage or an outsider or any of that. So I know a lot of women go through that, and I've spent a lot of time in especially in my earlier days at Twitter, working with organizations like Girls Who Code, working to promote STEM for young women and all of that. And sure, there's been, incidents here and there that I could have done without, but overall, I feel extremely lucky that I've just been surrounded by supportive people my entire career.
Yeah. And walk me through those early days at Twitter. You joined in 2009, from my understanding.
Yep.
What was that experience like? What was the energy like? How was it overall?
I was reflecting on this morning. It was, in many ways, it was like we didn't know what was ahead of us, and it was one of those places that we had some. It was early days of the internet. The iPhone had just come out. We did not have an iPhone app. It was just the web app, and we were trying to build something that a lot of people were paying attention to. And it was just exciting. And every time something happened in the world where Twitter was involved, it was just this like moment of like, holy shit, like we're actually working on something that matters. And there was that energy in the beginning. And I have a lot of really fond memories and feelings about those early days.
Yeah.
But it was like a real startup. Yeah.
And we'll talk about this because you saw a whole, sleuth of changes, if you will, at Twitter. But in those early days, you also worked on products like Vine, and then you eventually found Periscope. So very much video streaming, area. What attracted you to that? Was that almost very clear to you, given even from a young age, I would assume, given, video games and things like that, or what kind of stuck with you there?
I honestly, I would say that was more random.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have like some like narrative that like ties all the stuff that I did together. But no, I mean, I was working in 2012. I was working on Twitter for Android. I had joined the Twitter for Android team, and I learned Android. I'd been on that team for maybe 2 years, and then the CEO of Twitter at the time, Dick Costolo,
Yeah.
asked me, and again, just I feel very lucky to have supporters and mentors all throughout my career, and Dick has definitely been one of them. We had just acquired Vine, which only had an iOS app and hadn't even really launched yet. I think they were only in a beta or something. And he was like, "Hey, we need an Android app. Do you want to move to New York and go build it and start it, and build out that team?" And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
And I was 26, 27. I can't remember how that timing worked out, but I think in 2013 I moved to New York, and I was there for half a year, I think, and built out the Vine for Android team.
So, given that experience, right, the CEO of Twitter is coming to you and saying, you know what, we have conviction, we have confidence in you that you can go build it out. Even after that initial yes, did you ever have a, oh shit, am I capable of doing this? Or like, what did I sign myself up for? Was there a fear that you had, or how did you feel through that?
I was definitely nervous because
Yeah.
at that point I had not built an app from scratch before, and I, had a couple of years of Android under my belt.
Yeah.
Um, but as uh, you know, software changes so quickly, and like I was like, I wasn't going to build it exactly the same way we built Twitter. I was going to try to use some new things, and then of course there was this whole video aspect that I had never worked with before, and luckily we hired another Android engineer who I'm very fond of. His name's Eddie, and he had a lot more background in video, and he taught me a ton about how all of that works. um, and we did it. We got through it. One of the things that I think helped me with that fear of not having done this before and having quite a bit of responsibility on my shoulders was that the active programming, which I was doing a ton of at that time, kind of spoke for itself, right? Like at the end of the day, I knew how to code, and yes, there were going to be things that I didn't know, but I was going to learn them, and just kind of taking everything one step at a time, being like, you know how to do this, just do it. Really, really helped me. Yeah.
Yeah. How was that transition to not being an individual programmer, you're focused on your own code, to now leading a team, right? And leading other people and making sure that, vision aligned, values aligned, the hiring. How did you kind of interpret that and go through that transition?
So it wasn't my first time as a manager. I had previously
Yeah.
been a manager. I had become a manager and then back to being an IC, an individual contributor, probably twice at Twitter before moving over to Vine. And so I had learned a lot of early lessons becoming an engineering manager and kind of leading a team. And I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes. I know I made a lot of mistakes, but also learned a lot. And my style, my general style is to, kind of treat people how you think they want to be treated, and lead with that in mind, and know when to assert your leadership, and also know when to back off, and also know that like everyone wants something different out of their leaders. Some people want someone who's more hands-on, that they can talk to all the time, constantly. And if that's what's required, then that's what's required. And some people are kind of like, I just, I don't want to see you until I have a problem or whatever. And that's like also fine. And so just being able to like adjust to what people need is kind of my style of management. But then that is always under the context of like, what is the business, what is the business in need of, and how are you driving your team towards that? And sometimes, ideally, those things are always aligned, but they're not always. And so kind of managing that is always tricky. But all to say, that transition for me, again, was nerve-wracking, but totally doable. And just like with everything else in my career, if you know how to do something, you can do it. If you don't, ask for some help and, keep going.
I like that. I like that a lot. So walk me a bit through, you decide to leave Twitter and go join a startup. What was this impetus to do that? And yeah, how was that experience? What made you decide to leave?
So I had spent 4.5 years at Twitter at that point. And Vine was a tumultuous place. And by the end of my time at Vine, I was not happy.
Why was it tumultuous, first of all?
Oh, man. So many reasons. I think Vine went through something that I subsequently went through again, which is Facebook went after it. And so when they launched Instagram video, and the Vine numbers were they were no longer what they once were. And that added a lot of stress onto the team, trying to think about like, what would we do? What could we do in order to regain, the popularity and that it once had. And at the same time, from Twitter's perspective, how do we deal with this Vine as a business? Is it contributing to the company the way we want it to contribute? So there was all these tensions around that. And I think that put a lot of pressure on the team. The team also felt very separate from Twitter. And
I was going to ask, yeah.
That was deliberate in the beginning, but over time, especially as Vine needed more help from Twitter, it started to kind of fold in, and not everyone was happy with that. And I think there was just a lot of conflict and tension there.
But did you though ultimately feel the safety net of Twitter? Because it's one thing of like Vine standalone, right? And then a competitor comes in and kind of eats you, and you see the numbers decline, but that's it. And then it's almost, you have nothing. Did you personally be like, you know what, it's okay because I have Twitter?
Yes. I think there was a sense of that safety. And that's one of the reasons why a company like Vine would sell to a company like Twitter, is to be able to rely on that safety net and also access all of their resources and all of that kind of thing. I do still think, though, that it was quite a blow to the team, and the subsequent blows, which were like, the team wanted to and trying to do other things, but not always moving in the same direction. And Twitter trying to kind of rein it all in and be like, maybe we should focus over here. And that caused a lot of tension. I also think that, especially in those early days when I joined the team, I was probably seen as like, oh, here's the person from Twitter. And I think, I would like to think that we got over that over time, but I don't blame them for feeling that way. And I think there was, at the very end, there was poor management, a lot of mistakes from all sides, Vine side and Twitter side. And I had to go.
Yeah. So I guess walk me through, how did you discover this new startup that you wanted to join? What was exciting to you about it?
So the app was called Secret, and I think the iOS app had launched. And again, I can't remember if it was just privately or not. Um, but I had access to an app called Secret. I think that means it had launched actually. That was started by two guys, David Bytow and Chris Bader, who I knew through folks that I knew at Google, and we had many mutual connections. And I was introduced to them, and they were like, "We need someone to come build our Android app." And I was like, "This feels perfect. It feels like an app that's like taking off." For anyone who doesn't remember, it was like an anonymous social app, but you could see if a post was from someone in your contact circle. So it just lends itself to like a lot of fun and very salacious interactions. Um, and it just seemed to be a hot startup that was up and coming. And I knew I wanted to leave Twitter. So it just felt like a perfect fit. I met with David and a woman who was also there, Jude and Chris. The three of them had kind of started it not that long before I joined. And I felt like I got on really well with all of them. And so I joined.
And given that decision, and then ultimately leaving not so long after and finding Periscope, how would you even almost categorize your risk profile at this stage?
You know, being in my 20s with no other responsibilities and an appetite to work really hard and not like, again, not having responsibilities, that is something I definitely recommend you do in your 20s. You have the energy, and if you don't have any other responsibilities, you can really pour your heart into things and take high risks. And that was fine. So Secret didn't last very long, and I left shortly before it folded. And that was fine. I moved on to the next thing. I was excited to. The whole thing, look, Secret had many ups and downs, big roller coaster,
Right.
and it was under such spotlight from the tech press. And I wouldn't have changed a thing. It was such an amazing experience to see that from the front row. But it ran its course, and then I had to go.
So now it's easy to look back and be like, you know what? It was great. I learned a lot and I was able to move on. And maybe this is true even then, but in the moment where kind of shit hit the fan and it was going under, did you have the same calmness in a sense? And you were like, you know what? It's fine. I'll find something else.
Yes. Like, look,
Wow.
day to day, I'm sure I was like
Right.
stressed about, when a company is going in that direction, you can feel it. And so that makes for a lot of, maybe tense conversations and all that kind of stuff. But the whole time I knew, I was like, this was a golden age for new apps. I knew I was going to find something else.
Is there anything that you would have done differently in that evaluation process before choosing to accept Secret's offer and joining Secret?
I don't think so. I
Yeah.
don't think so. I mean, I think, I had spent, enough time at Twitter. I knew I wanted to leave. And the idea to go be the Android engineer at this new company was really exciting.
Right.
Um, and I felt like, I
Yeah.
felt like it was right.
I felt like also you were drawn by the people, like you mentioned, the founders, like you really clicked with them. And that seemed to be a really big aspect of your decision too, which is great.
Definitely. And I feel, again, very lucky that I have had the opportunity to work with people that I get on with and I share similar interests with, and like we vibe and all of that. And
Yeah.
that makes it fun. And I work with some really great people at Secret.
So, following the people track, if you will, you then find Periscope. It
Yes.
seems like you also really got along with the founder, as he is your now husband, from
That's
my
right.
understanding. So, I guess walk me a little bit through the process of joining Periscope, what appealed to you there, and what ultimately happened getting acquired by Twitter.
Well, I had joked earlier that I wish there was some like narrative that tied everything together, but I guess with what I'm about to say, it kind of does tie everything together. Periscope was a social live streaming app. They had an iOS app. They were in a private launch. They needed an Android engineer to come build their Android app. And I thought, well, here we go again. And I I when I look back at all of this, there is something fun that ties it all together, which is I've always started building these Android apps in the late winter, early spring, and then launched them by June. That happened basically 3 times in a row with Vine, Secret, and Periscope.
Right.
And So it just felt like the season was upon me again. Um, so anyway, I met the founders and the early employees at Periscope. They seemed like a great group of folks. The app seemed really great, and I decided to join them.
And did you know at that early stage that it was even in their vision that, they may get acquired by a Twitter? Or was it more like, we're
So
going to do this? Yeah. How was that messaging almost relayed?
So what happened was I was talking to them. We had a few conversations, and then I decided to join them. So I told Kayvon and Joe, the founders, that I would like to join, and they were like, "Okay, let's go, let the three of us go get a drink somewhere, and we can talk about it." And so we did, and they're like, "We would love for you to join us. We need to tell you something, and that's that we've sold the company to Twitter."
I see.
And I was like, get the fuck out. I was like, I was just there. I had not intended on going back to Twitter, but even as I said that, I knew that I was going to do it.
Because and if from, your Vine experience, you left Twitter with a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth. From any person hearing that story, right? That could
Yeah,
assume that.
yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So, what made you still, knowing that they sold it to Twitter, you were like, at the end of the day, I just want to be a part of this team and these people. And if that means going back to Twitter, okay, so be it.
So, good question. Twitter is a little bit like Hotel California, where you can check out anytime you want, but you can never really leave. And even in the year that I was away from Twitter, I never felt like I was out of it.
Mm.
And I remember an example of this. It was the Christmas, it was, I think, the day after Christmas in 2014. So end of 2014, beginning of 2015. The Twitter for Android app suffered a bug related to a date time error, a Java datetime error, where the end of the year ends up being calculated slightly before the actual end of the year. And the app logged out when I launched it. And I went to my friend, my sister, and my family. My family is a primarily Android family.
Okay.
And I was like, "Hey, do you mind launching Twitter and seeing what happens?" Keep in mind, I had been not an employee of Twitter now for, I don't know, 9 months,
Right.
and it logged them out, and I knew the code path that would cause that in my head, and I
Yeah.
was like, "This is a very, very bad problem." And I immediately texted Kevin Wheel, who was at the time the head of product there, and I was like, "There's a problem with the Android app." And he was like, I'm seeing this. I hear about it. You're right. And, thanks for letting me know, but we got it or whatever. And I tried my hardest to just like not think about what was happening and like what would have, the circumstances that would cause that bug. It ended up being, anyone on Android who had launched the app at the time would have been logged out, which is very problematic when you're dealing with a really big,
Yeah.
user base and all of that. Anyway, that's all to say. And I felt stressed and, during that time, and I wasn't even an employee of the company. That's all to say. It felt like I never left. And so when I rejoined, it still felt like coming back home. It felt like this is what I was supposed to do. A part of me was really happy actually that they had sold the company to Twitter and that I could come back.
Yeah.
And now, having been away from Twitter for a year and a half or whatever, and the current state of Twitter is one that I like don't even recognize, I still kind of feel that way. And I know that a lot of folks who have left Twitter, unexpectedly and in a huge en masse situation probably also feel the same way.
Yeah, it's almost, and I like that story because it's like your first love maybe, or like you'll always
Yeah.
have a soft spot for them and they'll always be there, even though, yeah, there are things that happen that didn't go how you planned. Or so that's super fascinating. Do you attribute that to, is it that early, maybe like under Dick Costolo, like his leadership and making sure everyone feels, part of a big mission? What do you attribute that to?
Maybe it was being a part of that company, since it was 75 people when I joined, and maybe there's a part of me that uh, still just has such a fondness of that team and that product. And Ev Williams was the CEO at that time, and
Yeah.
I felt like he was literally leader of the flock, and I felt like I was part of it, that team and everything. And same with Dick, and same with Jack. I really look up to all three of them. But part of it is also the ubiquity of Twitter in the world.
Mm.
And I went through a phase where I joined Twitter when, maybe my friends in tech knew what Twitter was, but like my parents certainly didn't, or whatever. And I saw it grow into something that was worldwide. And I would go visit, London, Paris, or my dad in West Africa, and I would see billboards with the Twitter logo on it. And I was like, it just had such a profound impact on me to see that what I was working on was having such a big impact. And that has not gone away ever. And to this day, when I see the Twitter logo, when I'm watching CNN or like whatever, I have this feeling inside about, what we created. Um, and it's still
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. It's almost just that feeling that you're touching people's lives and making that impact. And ultimately that's off probably what led to you deciding, you know what, I'm going to build my own company and put it in my
Maybe,
hands. So
maybe.
so before we get to that, I you ultimately decided to transition actually to product management and
Yes.
put away, the software engineering hat, if you will. What made you decide that, and how was that transition? Was it a pretty seamless one?
So it was seamless. I think most of the engineering that I did was very much product influenced, and
Okay.
working on Twitter for Android, especially well, any of the Android apps, really. Um, it You're working with the pixels that users touch, and
Hmm.
so I had a strong that that part of the stack resonates strongly with me. I liked making things the way I would want to use them, the way users would want to use them. And when I was at Periscope, we didn't have a product manager for a while, and I started doing a lot of that product work. And then it just kind of got bigger. I was leading when we kind of folded more into Twitter, I was leading a lot of the video client work from the engineering side, but also doing a lot of that product work. And then one day I was kind of like, I'm just going to become a product manager. I'm just going to call it what it is and move
Yeah.
into that role. Yeah.
And towards the end of your Twitter experience, as we all know, Elon Musk took over and became the leader of Twitter. And like you said, even before, you were under Ev, Williams, Dick, and Jack, and you have a lot of admiration, right? And you saw a lot of positivity in that experience. Walk me now through that transition right under Elon. Obviously, there's so much publicly of, I've talked to ex Twitter employees just like yourself that have different experiences being internally there. What was that transition for you, seeing it in action?
So I hate to disappoint you, but I left before Elon came.
I see.
So I didn't
Okay.
actually witness that transition. Now, I had my daughter in April of 2022. And while I was in the hospital is when Elon joined the board for a hot minute.
Okay.
And so my husband and I were both like, what is going on? My husband was on his paternity leave. He was still at Twitter. And I was, in labor. And we were like, what is happening here? And so, from my perspective, I was really excited because by the time I left Twitter, one of my biggest gripes with Twitter was really around our speed of execution and, these like walls and barriers we had created that really hindered progress. I was excited for Elon to come in and shake things up. And, even though I was no longer at the company, I was still excited about the prospect of that. And he seemed to really like Twitter Blue and the idea of an alternative revenue stream for Twitter. And I, started and led Twitter Blue. And so that was all very exciting at the beginning. And then I don't know what happened. Everything went south. I don't know. He's obviously a very smart man. He has never run an internet software company before, and it shows.
And it was, if you can almost, even stepping away, right? Right now, you're founding your own company. What have you learned from Elon, maybe, whether he was under you or from your husband's experience, whatever it may be? But what have you learned, like, okay, this is something I want to emulate versus this is something I cannot do. This is detrimental.
I mean, I think through the layoffs that he did in the fall of last year, he just didn't treat people with dignity, and people, myself included, spend their lives passionately working on a product that they believe in. Right. And if you have to let someone go, which happens, and the economics of a situation may mean you need to do major rifts, and that happens. But you just treat people with dignity because they deserve to be treated that way. And I could never.
Yeah.
I could never.
Right. And it's almost, do you see it also as a level of, is it empathy too? Because something I also constantly think about, right? Especially, with maybe the VC hat on, whatever you may want to call it, but we're often thinking, okay, what makes a great leader a leader? What makes them achieve the success that they have? And you hear stories like Elon and Jobs and Steve Jobs and whatnot, that there are stories where there is a lack of dignity towards others, or they don't treat people with maybe that respect. Is it in spite of that, or you think that's actually what just gets them to be where they are today?
I feel like there's a huge difference between Jobs and Musk. And look, yes, people have all these stories and they made movies or whatever about how he was hard about, things. And yeah, because he wanted excellence from people, right? And he had this way and this leadership and management style that demanded excellence. And he had, people who didn't think the way he did, that he couldn't get, maybe you can explain that properly or whatever. I don't know. Right. But I don't think he casually disrespected the people that work for him en masse in the way that we've seen here. And I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't at Apple. There wasn't Twitter during, Twitter wasn't prevalent during, many of these stories. So we didn't get to see all the juicy inside information. But I think there is a difference between being a harsh, cutthroat leader and just not, having respect for people as human beings. I think there's a wide gap in between there, and there's a big difference. And there's a ton of leaders in Silicon Valley who, people will say are assholes or whatever. And to be honest, and maybe this is a contrarian opinion, some of my favorite people that I have worked with have been complete assholes. And that is, that happens. But I don't think even the people that I would consider to be the biggest assholes that I've worked with would ever treat people the way Elon treats people.
Yeah, it's almost, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you think otherwise, but it's almost a difference of being an asshole in the sense that you're disagreeable, right? Where if someone comes in and maybe says an opinion that prevents you from reaching your mission or your ultimate prize or what you believe the success of the company can look like, then you're going to be, you're going to push back on it. And that's okay. Versus just treating people purely with disrespect for no reason.
For no reason. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So, okay. Ultimately, as we know, as I said in the intro, you left Twitter, and now you're a founder. You decided to take the plunge, be your own founder. What went through your mind? Was there ever like a Sarah, what the hell am I doing? Or it was like, nope, this is the right decision and this is my next step?
I didn't think I would be doing this at this time. So when I left Twitter, I was in my second trimester, and I spent my third trimester just focusing on myself and my health, and preparing for the delivery and all that.
Yeah.
And and then I figured I would spend a bunch of time at home with the baby and just kind of do that until something else came up. I am not the kind of person that gets bored anymore. Not like when I was a kid, and because and the reason I feel that way is because I love reading. I love learning new things. I love video games and television and movies and art and music. And I cannot remember the last time I was bored, because we are all very lucky to have access to so much art and culture at any time. So there's no getting bored for me. Instead, I came across an idea that I could no longer, my co-founder and I, we like mulled on this for a bit, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to start a company or not, or kind of pursue this, but this idea wouldn't leave my head. Mm-hmm. And then I realized at some point that I am not going to be able to keep going until I see this idea to fruition. And that's why I started. And if I didn't have that idea, I probably wouldn't be working.
I love that. And I really think that should be the bar that people have for starting a company, where you can't not think about it. You can't do anything but think about it.
Right.
So in that experience that you've had, thus far since February, what are some maybe misconceptions about being a founder, or things that you only learn by actually doing it, right? Like, people can read about, can learn from other founders, but until you actually are in the driver's seat, you see the truth to it. Are there moments that you've had like that?
We're so early right now that so far it hasn't felt too differently than, working on an early stage project.
Got it.
It may feel differently at a later stage, but a friend of mine asked me the other day, like, how's being a founder treating you? Is it really hard? All of that. And I was like, well, it's not harder than being a mom. So it's fine. But again, I'm super early.
And you're doing both, though. Like you said, you didn't, you have a daughter. Not, how old is she?
She's 15 months.
Right. So pretty young.
Very
How
young.
has that balance been?
That's been the tougher part, I think, than just the work. Balancing being a mom, balancing what I never understood before, but I understand now, is the mom guilt of, like, maybe instead of working, I should be hanging out with my kid. But also, the realization that, like, I, want my kid to see me as a working mother. Not that I feel like it would have been a negative thing for her to see me as a stay-at-home mother either. But this is the choice that I'm making, and it's fine. And ultimately thinking into the future and looking back, 10 years from now, when my kid is in school and doesn't want to have anything to do with me, will I have regretted not striking on this idea while the proverbial iron was hot? And I think I would have. So that
I love that.
kind of plays.
And recently I had Elizabeth Wheel, Kevin's wife, on the show, and we talked about that idea of mom guilt, right? And how it's so prevalent from what I've learned from you guys. So yeah, I think that's definitely true. And before we go on to more fun questions, by the way, Sarah, I can talk to you for hours, but before we go to that, I actually want to go back very briefly on what advice would you give almost those employees who left Twitter, or who left any company really, in such a maybe hard way, that it's either unexpected or being disrespected by a leader? How do you almost find that confidence again? What would you give advice for them?
I mean, I empathize. It was hard. I left Twitter twice, and it was voluntary both times, and it was hard enough as a voluntary departure. I think
Yeah.
one of the things that was really different about Twitter, and I haven't really worked in too many other places, so I can't necessarily speak for other places. For all of its faults, there was a lot of love at Twitter for the people, the company, and the product.
Right.
And you could feel it. And even the most curmudgeonly people, of which there are curmudgeons in every organization, still had a passion for the product. And, there was, I don't know, it was a very special place. And so to all those people that were, suddenly found themselves not at Twitter, I empathize deeply. I know how much it hurts. And this is not how I would have ever thought the history of this company would unfold. But maybe there's some solace in knowing that we all feel this way.
Right.
If anyone ever wants to talk about it, I'm here to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about it. It was tragic.
Yeah.
Really tragic.
Yeah. Okay, Sarah, I want to know, what's a book you've read in the past that has really, you think, very much changed either your outlook on life, something, but really spoke to you and you still think about it to this day? And it could be personal, professional, however, which way.
Good question. I love to read when I have time. I don't usually like to read nonfiction. I usually like to read fiction.
Same.
Yeah. And let me answer this in a slightly different way. What is the book that I wish everyone would read?
Yeah.
So that when I talk to them, they have the context of that book.
Perfect.
World War Z is one of my all-time favorite books. And the reason why I think it's so brilliant is that it manages an extremely complex geopolitical scene in the backdrop of a zombie apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is absolutely brilliant. And it encompasses the reason why I love science fiction so much. Which,
Cool.
The zombies are cool and the lasers are cool and the starships are all cool. But science fiction is about stories about people and about societies and what, happens when they're facing adversity. And it allows you to kind of pretend a scenario in a fictional, science fictional context, but really has so much relevance to everyday society. And World War Z was written long before the COVID-19 pandemic. And my goodness, how on the nose it is.
It's scary. Right?
Have you read it?
I haven't, but I know the concept, and I know even there are other similar things like that where written so many years ago, and yet things have come to fruition in a similar light or somewhat. Yeah.
Totally. I love books that do that.
Yeah.
And they're lessons to be learned. I think everyone likes to assume in the zombie apocalypse, they're not going to be the person that only thinks about themselves and thinks about society and all that. But we just had a pandemic and, I don't think everyone behaved, probably myself included at times. I don't think everyone behaved the way they thought they would.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Sarah, what is your superpower?
What is my superpower? Oh God. I would like to think that I am no bullshit. So I like to think that I can cut through.
I like that.
I think that's one of the reasons why, my time at Twitter, I was often asked to start really gnarly projects because they knew that I could cut through the bullshit to get things done.
That's a great one. All right, Sarah, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Carly. It was great to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us.
If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.